All right, so today we're going to be doing LeetCode question 57, insert an interval. So in this question, you're given an array of non-overlapping intervals where intervals I equals start and end. So start and end, kind of think of it as your x and y, right? Right, so they represent the start and the end of the ith interval. And intervals is sorted in ascending order by start. You also are given the new interval, which is another point, and like the other intervals, has a start and end to it. So now as we kind of have an idea of what we're given, what do we need to do with that given stuff? Well, let's take a look at examples, right? Example 1, you have intervals, right, which is basically an array with multiple points within it, and then you have new interval, and new interval is just a whole new point which we need to add into the intervals array. Now as we have an idea that we need to add, that may seem easy, but like, how is that going to work? Well, the thing is let's take a look at example 1, right? You have point 1 and 3 and 6 and 9. Remember that you have a start and end. So 1 is your start, 3 is your end. Same thing goes here, 6 is your start, 9 is your end. We want to insert the new interval, right, into the interval. So taking a look at our new interval, your start is 2, your end is 5. Well, 2 is in between 1 and 3. Here's the thing, right? We need to merge these intervals together because they are overlapping one another, right? This is the whole basis of this question, is when they overlap, we want to be able to grab the lowest value from your x and the highest value from your y, merge them, create a whole new interval, right, and continue the loop. So how that's going to work for this example is given 1 and 3 and 2 and 5. Notice how 2 is in between 1 and 3, numerical wise, right? So we need to merge these two values. Okay, well, how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do that by using some sort of test case, right? And we're going to grab at index 0, 1, and 2, right? And grab the lowest, the minimum, and the minimum is going to be 1, so that's why 1 is here. And then you're going to go and grab at index 1, which index 1 is basically just 3 and 5, right? And find your maximum. And our maximum would be 5, right? So we would output 1, 5. Now our new interval, instead of 2, 5, is going to be updated to 1, 5, right? And we're going to go and do the same thing. Okay, well, taking a look with the values 1 and 5 for our x and y, does 1 overlap within here? No. Does 5 overlap within here? No, because 6, right, the beginning of this interval, is higher than the last of our interval. So with that being said, all we need to do is just append 6, 9 to the result that we're holding our answer in, right? Because already new intervals already sorted out. There's nothing else, right? And we output, and that's our answer. So with that being said, we kind of explained the idea verbally on what needs to be done and what this question is looking for. And now we just need to create that idea using code. And it's not as complex as it seems, and we're going to go do this right now, right? So I just mentioned that we need to have something to store this answer. So all we need to do is in the output, it's stored in an array or a list or whatever you want to call it. So we're just going to create an array, right? Result equals that. Blank, because we're going to be inserting these intervals later on. Okay, what's next? Well, we're given intervals, right, where it's a list of multiple values. Well, we're going to need a loop through each value, right, to make sure that that value is less than or greater than the new interval. So what to take from that is we need to loop, right? In order to loop, we're just going to create a for loop, right? So for x in range, length of intervals, because that is what this variable is called, right? Beautiful, right? So for x in range and length intervals, what are we doing? Well, now as we have this for loop, right, we're going to go and create some edge cases, right? Because this is basically the entirety of what we're doing, what we were just talking about. We are going to go and first create an edge case representing if there is no overlap, right? Because there will be instances where there's not. Just like how I mentioned, if the new interval is 1, 5, does that overlap with 6, 9? No. In that case, all you do is just append result, right? So how is that going to look? Well, we need to check if something happens, so if statement, right? If new interval at index 1 is less than intervals at whatever x may be at the time, so intervals for x, right, at index 0, right, then we are just going to result append. Result is the list we just made. Append is adding new interval, right? And we want to return result plus intervals starting from x all the way down. Beautiful. All right. So this is a section that represents if there is no overlap. What this is basically checking is, does my new interval end before the current interval starts? Here you go. So let's take a look at this little segment of code so we can understand what everything is doing before we continue writing. So new interval, right? New interval at index 1, which is 5, right? Is that less than interval at whatever x may be? So if we're in the first loop, it would be 1, 3, right? And at index 0. So is 5 less than 1, right? No. However, let's think about it. Let's say in some universe it was, right? What this does is basically confirm, okay, well, whatever we have right now is less than the beginning value we have. And if this is an ascending order, then anything after it is going to be greater. Remember how I mentioned it is in ascending order already, right? So just append the new interval in the beginning, right, to result, and then return result plus intervals at starting from x, basically your beginning point, and that colon and nothing after it represents just everything after intervals, which is just the entirety of intervals. So what this does is basically just prints out everything in the one off chance that new interval is less than anything we have, right? Or before everything we have. Beautiful. Now as we understand what that line does, let's create another condition, right? Or another test case. This one says, or this one we're going to make is elif because we already made an if statement. And we're going to do this, so let's say it's going to continue going to see where the new interval belongs, right? So what I mean by that is we're going to go and grab an interval, right? And we're going to see if it's after, right? So we just checked if this is before. We're going to see if it's greater than. And if it's greater than, then we need to continue on to the loop, right? So how that's going to look is new interval, right, at index 0. So new interval at index 0. So we're grabbing the beginning, right? We're going to see if this is greater than intervals at whatever x may be at index 1, right? And if so, then we are going to append intervals at index. Okay, there you go. Let me just make sure everything's spelled correctly. Okay, so new interval, right, at 0, 2, is greater than intervals at x. So let's say we're still on the first iteration at 1, right, 3. Is 2 greater than 3? So this is saying if 2 is greater than 3, right, then what we want to do is add intervals, right, x. So intervals at x, so whatever that may be, whatever iteration, and we're going to add that into result, right? So like I mentioned before, this is basically saying to continue. So if it's after, we just grab the interval. Oh my gosh. Oh, we're having a moment here. Hold up. I'm low-key getting a little bit caught up with this line. Okay, yeah. So if it's after, we just grab the interval we're on from the loop and add it to the result, and just continue going on to see where that interval belongs. I get it. So what we're doing is if it's not, then we continue going on to the loop, right? If it is, then we just add it to the result. Okay, I understand what we need to do after this. I was getting a little bit caught up. That is my bad, guys. Okay, so this is mentioning if there is an overlap. Okay. Because so this whole section here, this if and elif, represent if there is no overlap, right? No overlap. Because the new interval variable isn't changing, right? We are just appending things to result. So that is what that elif was for, right? To see if it was after. Now we're going to do the instance if there is overlap, which would require us to change the variable called new interval, right? Like how I mentioned that we're going to be changing that output and then comparing and continuing it through the for loop. Okay, so how that would look, right, is we're going to go and create a list, and we're going to grab the minimum of new interval at index 0, right, and intervals at index 0, beautiful, and the maximum of, it's literally kind of the same thing here, of 1, and intervals x and 1. Okay, what's going on here? So literally, like I just mentioned in the beginning when we were talking about example 1, you are going to go and grab the minimum of intervals or new interval 0, so 2, and intervals at x 0, which is 1. We're going to grab the minimum of that. The minimum between 2 and 1 is 1, so this changes into 1. And now you're grabbing the max, right? So of new interval at index 1 is 3, and intervals, or whatever x may be at, which in this instance, we're going to go and say it's this one, right? And we're at index 1, so that'd be 3, 5, or 3, right? Well, 5 is the max, so it would be 5. And because we grabbed the minimum and the maximum, you're going to have 1, 5. And new interval updates and changes that value, and we continue that new interval in the for loop. So then we check the test cases again or whatever, right? And if anything, then new interval updates, and yeah, beautiful. I get that now. Okay, and then all we need to do is just update result dot append our new interval, right, and then return results. Beautiful. I think everything looks good. Let's give it a run. Out of range. List index out of range. If new interval is less than x at 0. For x in range length intervals, if new interval out of range, 0, is all that for new intervals. Oh, I already see an issue here, but I don't know if that has to do. Actually, no, it may. Yeah. Hold up. There you go. Oh my goodness. All right. Sorry for that delay. Beautiful. Okay. The issue was that the parentheses for minimum was all the way over here, basically messing up the new interval variable, right? we want to make sure we grab the minimum and maximum, right? Adding that tiny little parentheses kind of spreads the width, I would assume is how you would call it, of minimum all the way here instead of its respective little area, which is here. So my bad for that. Anyway, out of those 2 errors are done. What to take from this question? We are basically creating an array. We're looping through the length of intervals. We create some edge cases. 2 of them, these 2 in here in particular, are to represent if there is no overlap, right? If either it's less than or greater than. If there is an overlap, then what we do is we grab the minimum of the new interval and interval, right, and the maximum of new interval and interval, right? Set that to a variable, append it, right, and then with this interval, continue the loop until we finish, going through the length of intervals, and then returning the result. So with that being said, I think this was not too hard of a question. Data structure in particular we were using was just arrays. And yeah.